Hello and welcome to the Power Hour DFS podcast. I'm Scott Barrett, joined as always by the effervescent John Proctor, aka at Super Duperman 22. This marks our second ever podcast for iTunes, and this is our second episode in our series on MFL10s. We're primarily a DFS podcast, but during this downtime, we're doing a series on MFL10s. Last week we had Joshua Lake on to talk quarterbacks. This week we have Graham Barfield on to talk running backs. Graham is a very close personal friend of mine. I've been a huge fan of his work, going all the way back to our days together at Numberfire. Even before I was writing football articles, I was just doing baseball articles, and I was a big fan of him. He's a must-follow on Twitter, always has the best stats. He's at Graham Barfield, GrahamBarfield. He's always putting out really good articles as well for RotoWorld, Dynasty League Football, and Fantasy Labs. He's a guy whose brain I've picked a bunch of times talking Dynasty or DFS, and he put together a really cool new statistic called running back yards created. Graham, how are you doing today?
All right, we'll just end the show on that. We don't need anything more. That was the best intro I've ever gotten. Show's over. We don't need to talk about anything else. No, but seriously, thank you so much for everything. Scott, you're a good friend. We've had some good conversations.
Thanks for
Yeah, we've had some great conversations in the DMs about football and non-football. So thanks for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to the talk today.
You want to just jump right into this new statistic you created?
Sure, let's do it.
Running back yards created? Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about it? I don't know.
Sorry.
Introduce it to us?
Yeah, so the thing with yards created has been it's kind of been my personal journey to rip off Matt Harmon. No, I'm joking in his reception. No, I'm basically just trying to not necessarily divorce running back play from offensive line play because I think it's impossible. But I just basically want to know. I want to know and maybe better quantify running back talent and how these guys win on the field. So with yards created, I basically just chart the allotted amount of carries I have for the film I have. I chart every carry. I chart inside or outside zone. I chart if it's in shotgun, under center. A new feature that's going to be coming out pretty soon is based on blocking scheme. That's something I'm trying to get better at personally. Yards created is basically just my new kind of thing to maybe better analyze running backs just a little bit better.
So what specifically are you looking at? Are you looking at missed tackles forced? Are you looking at yards after contact?
Yeah, pretty much everything that you would want to know about running backs I try to hammer. Missed tackles forced. Yards after contact is something that you can kind of find pretty much anywhere. Like Pro Football Focus does a really good job with that. So I don't chart that necessarily, but the big thing that I chart is yards blocked and yards created. Football Outsiders has a statistic called adjusted line yards, and I kind of use that as a proxy to understand offensive line play just before I go into it. So I chart yards blocked and the yards created and the differentials there.
So I read a few of these articles, so I know some of the answers already. But who specifically are you really high on and really low on compared to your peers based on this new statistic?
Well, I mean, if you would have asked me this question 2 months ago when this first started, I would have said CJ Prosise, but I think the market is kind of coming towards my line of thinking. He's the second most elusive back on a per attempt basis per yards created. He was just above class average in yards created per attempt now that I've got some more running backs. But obviously he's an excellent pass catcher. We all know he's a converted wide receiver. He played slot at Notre Dame, and he played safety in high school. So he's obviously just an all-around great athlete. One of the really nice things I like about Prosise is they split him out wide at Notre Dame, which is really, really interesting because I think that makes him a slightly more experienced receiver. They split him out wide 22% of the time per yards created. That was the highest by far in the class. Second was Tyler Irvin. So just as a floor, I think he's a great receiver. He's obviously got some things he's got to clean up just in terms of rushing because he's so raw. But Procise is definitely someone I'm totally in love with.
My question with Procise, and I guess one thing that me and Scott had talked with Russell Clay on Twitter, do you think that there's a concern that he's so new that he might have trouble picking up, pass protection schemes and things like that, especially having a running quarterback where there's a lot of things that are changing on each individual play? Is that any concern for you?
That's a very interesting question. It's something I've kind of bounced around in my head. He was a fine pass protector, just to note that. He had a 75% pass per execution per yards created on 28 pass per attempt. So he's just basically right in line with class average in pass protection, which is fine. A lot of these guys are pretty raw pass protectors coming out of college, so that's good to see. But yeah, Russell Wilson's obviously super creative, and you really don't know where he's going to be at any given time. I kind of see it on the flip side. I think Procise will maybe make that offense more explosive because he's the best pass-catching running back Russell Wilson and that whole offense Darrell Bevell has ever had. So I see the definite upside in the floor as a receiver, but I could also see him struggling just a little bit early on before he kind of grasps the blocking scheme and everything that associates itself with that.
Makes sense.
The thing I like most about him right now, beyond just a pure evaluation standpoint, is we know he's very likely going to at least get the third down passing plays during the regular season, but also with Rawls out for probably the entire preseason and questionable for week one, that's an awesome opportunity for him playing with the ones to really establish himself. Who knows, maybe he'll end up starting week one. I think he's in a great situation. You've seen how monstrous Marshawn Lynch for fantasy owners Rawls was last year. Definitely a big fan of him. If you were in a draft today, where would you take him?
Well, I'm looking at ADP right now. He's the RB41 at 110 overall in MFL10s. I still think there's major equity there. He's going right. It looks like he's going right behind Kenneth Dixon. So I would be maybe somewhere in the RB32 or RB33 range. I haven't gotten my full rankings together. So I would imagine I'd be higher than the ADP consensus.
So are you out on Thomas Rawls?
Okay.
I honestly I have not fully. It's gonna be so dependent on what happens in the next 3 months with his recovery. If he's gonna miss the most of preseason and be questionable for week one, and Procise does indeed get a lot of run with the ones. I could see Rawls as a UDFA. This is just kind of the climate, by hook or by crook, whether it's right or wrong. UDFAs have a longer shot, no matter what, to establish themselves in the NFL. And Rawls was electric. He was great last year. We all used him in DFS. We all added him on waiver wires. So we all kind of have a really good view of Rawls. And obviously we hopefully won some money and some jelly beans using Rawls last year. But yeah, I have a major concern, man. If he's not going to be right during the preseason, they just drafted Procise in the third round. That to me sends alarm bells.
I'm with you. The thing with Rawls for me, that I'm so conflicted, is he was so good last year.
Yeah.
I watched almost all of his carries again, back in February when I was watching the second year guys. A fun stat with him too. Only 2 of the second year backs had more than 40% of their runs go for 5 yards or more, and it was Rawls and Carlos Williams. Rawls was just behind Carlos Williams, both just about 41% of their carries. I mean, he was insanely good. So it hurts me that he might not play, and it hurts me to push Procise completely, because I think as a runner, Thomas Rawls is probably way better today, if he's healthy, than Procise. So I don't know. Kind of conflicted on that one. I don't know. Scott's kind of out on Rawls, so I'm just trying to push him a little bit here.
I actually like Rawls. He did really well last year. My issue with him is just the injury thing for MFL10s. Like, I got burned bad by LaFell last year. I had like 20% LaFell ownership, and then he was just never right, and that injury just dragged on and on and on. So I really make a point to stay away from injured players. We could talk more about strategy with running backs and MFL10s, how many we want to take, what to do with injuries in a little bit, but I kind of want to go back to what Graham's doing here because I think he's doing really important, really groundbreaking work. Graham, my guy, I wrote a love letter to him for PFF a couple weeks ago, just absolutely in love with Zeke Elliott. Please tell me all of your data backs up the fact that he's far and away the number one running back in this class.
Yeah, sure. So he does, and he's just so sick. Like the economics of drafting a running back number 4 overall aside, the spot's fantastic. We don't need to talk about the Dallas offensive line. Obviously, they're maulers there, but just from a numbers standpoint, everything that we see on tape, everything that we've seen just from like cursory game logs to just maybe more efficiency stats, yards created completely backs up that he's the best back in this class. He's number 1 in yards created per attempt, number 1 in yards created per inside attempt and outside attempt. Granted, Ohio State did have, they're actually tied for the best offensive line per yards blocked and yards created. But Zeke, 94% pass per execution, excellent pass blocker. We all know he's a great pass catcher. He had 5.26 yards per route. He's just a stud all around. He's going to be a 3-down back. I've seen where people are concerned that Darren McFadden and Alfred Morris are going to steal snaps. I think that might be true the first couple of weeks, but long term, he's going to be like the 75% snap back that he's going to be a hammer, and they're going to hammer him. That's what they got him for. They're not going to put Alfred Morris on the field when they have Ezekiel Elliott. They just spent a 4th overall pick on him. Let's be serious.
Yep. And fun fact, Lance Dunbar was the highest fantasy points per snap running back last year. So that passing role is insanely valuable in Dallas. So even if he loses carries to Alfred Morris, you're really looking to get those receptions, and there's no way that Alfred Morris or DMC are going to play over him in the passing game.
Yeah, Dunbar, rest in peace. That was my boy last year. I love Lance Dunbar. I had him in so many MFL10s. I had him in a couple dynasty leagues because he was just dirt cheap, and the floor looked so good for the first couple of games because, like you said, the receptions, and that kind of went away with the ACL and now patella. But yeah, we all love Zeke, man. It's hard not to.
Yeah, I just want to say, so like some people are kind of on the fence about taking him in the first round even, or top 5 where I'm taking him, top 5 among running backs. So I need to just go out of my way to kind of like explain this a little bit. Darren McFadden is terrible. He's a bad running back. In his 3 seasons prior to joining the Cowboys, from 2012 to 2014, he rushed the ball 485 times for a 3.34 yards per carry average in 38 games. Over that stretch, his yards per carry average ranked 2nd worst, behind only Trent Richardson. Yet in 2015 with the Dallas Cowboys, whose offensive line is ranked 1st overall in run block each of the past 2 years, according to PFF, from week 7 until the end of the regular season, he averaged 18 carries per game, 87 rushing yards per game, and 4.75 yards per carry. On a 16-game sample, that's 293 attempts, 1,400 rushing yards, and would have been the 3rd most rushing yards and the 3rd highest rushing yards per carry average among all running backs with at least 150 attempts. Over that stretch, he was the number 5 overall fantasy running back, and over a full season and just 10 starts, he was the number 13 overall fantasy running back. Zeke Elliott is just going to lose his freaking mind. He is leaps and bounds better than Darren McFadden, who was a top 5 fantasy running back. It's just nuts.
Yeah, so here's an interesting question, Scott. I think we talked about this like maybe the night after the draft. Could you envision yourself taking Zeke as the RB1? Like if you had to take a running back at the 101, you were forced to in an MFL10. Let's just say you were. Would you be okay passing up like Le'Veon Bell or Todd Gurley for Zeke? Would you be cool with that?
I completely get it. I completely understand it. Le'Veon Bell has 2 season-ending injuries to the same knee over his past 7 games. Todd Gurley, he's great. I think he's a better pure runner than Zeke Elliott, but he's playing in a garbage offense, and he just doesn't catch passes.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
I've got Zeke as my RB4 right now in MFLs. After Bell, Gurley, I have Gurley and David Johnson sort of equal. I'm kind of just splitting my shares of them. Just the thing with Bell is not even so much that it's Bell. I mean, we saw what D'Angelo Williams did there. So that Pittsburgh running back role is just too valuable for me to move him off of my RB1, I think. Unless I hear news that the recovery he's having issues or something, but as of now, everything seems to be going fine, so I'm not backing off of Bell.
Yeah, just to that point, I'm kind of with you, John. I mean, Bell's going to be my RB1 whenever I get around to doing some ranks. But yeah, like they used Fitzgerald Toussaint as that like Bell hybrid D'Angelo Williams after D-Will got hurt. Like they just hammer their RB1s. They shovel in the snaps, they shovel in the ball. Todman got a few carries there at the end, but yeah, like that like you said, that role in itself like inherently is so valuable. It's hard for me to get off of that as well.
Yeah, he also had like good games with Michael Vick and I can't even remember his name because he was so bad at quarterback. So just that role, no matter who's running the offense, is just too valuable.
So I'm glad you guys brought this up, the value of different schemes or offenses for a running back. This kind of connects to work I'm doing. I have an article coming out for PFF in a couple of days on bell cow running backs. And basically what I did was I defined a bell cow running back as a running back who amasses over 66% of the team's running back carries, snaps, and targets in any given week. And what I found is that it's fairly common. It happens maybe about 6 or 7 times a week on average. And those running backs average 18.1 fantasy points per game. And the teams that have done that at a really high percentage are Chicago over the past 3 seasons. They had 36, although a lot of that is due to Matt Forte. And then second is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last year, let me pull it up, D'Angelo Williams had 9 such games. Le'Veon Bell had 4 such games. And then right behind them was Kansas City with 28. And then behind them was Dallas with 27. That's something we saw since over the past 2 seasons when Scott Linehan joined the Cowboys. They ranked 4th over the past 2 seasons. These are definitely really attractive offenses that just give a ton of carries and snaps and targets to their main running back. And really, there's no competition for them. Just let them loose and more opportunities for scoring points. So definitely, whoever it is, I'm attacking in DFS the Pittsburgh Steelers starting running back. The injury risk is definitely a concern, but I do have Le'Veon Bell as my RB1.
Yeah, those are some great numbers, and like to that point, just kind of wrapping up maybe the Zeke talk, but Darren McFadden had 8 games where he had more than 70% of Dallas's snaps, and he had a total of 10 where he had 11 when he had more than 60%. So that role is just so valuable in getting those guys that get the snaps. Maybe that's the way we need to start thinking about it, is not necessarily just so much like rush attempts, pure rush attempts, but just snaps and touches in general. That's the thing we need to start looking at, because so few of these guys, like you just mentioned, get a high percentage of snaps.
Yeah, I had 7 bell cow games for McFadden last year, and he didn't even get his first start until week 8. So it's definitely a very attractive role for Elliott.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I want to talk now. Again, the work you're doing is really, really awesome. People check it out. Where can they find it, Graham?
Yeah, so thanks for this little plug opportunity, Scott. I get to boost my ego. No, Dynasty League Football and the great guys, Eric Dickens, Ryan McDowell, they're allowing me to do some yards created content over at DLF now. So you can find me there. I'll have some articles out probably pretty soon. I'm going to be wrapping up the class, and I'll have a whole kind of rundown of the class. I'm not really sure how I'm going to handle it yet. So you can find me on DLF now. And I have a little small blog with the stupid WordPress still in the name, fantasygametheory.wordpress.com. That's my little blog where I get like 2 views a day. So you can find me there.
I'm definitely some of those views. I like that site. You used to put up your dynasty rankings. I guess they're over at DLF now, but they're really great, and they probably align more closely to my own rankings than anyone else on that site. Although they're all a bunch of great writers there. Let's talk now about MFL10 strategy. I know we had this conversation last year, Graham, where we and everyone in the industry, thought MFL10s were a broken game. All you had to do was draft 4 running backs in the first 4 rounds, or 4 in the first 5 rounds, and then never touch the position again. I did this. I did over 125 leagues last year. I was profitable, but I could have been so much more profitable if I just mixed up my strategy, went a little more wide receiver heavy in the beginning, but I was just like, oh yeah, man, Alfred Morris in the 4th round, give me Jamal Charles in the 1st round, Lamar Miller in the and then I'd have Doug Baldwin in the 17th. I'd have Jordan Reed in the 18th. I'd pass on Devonta Freeman in the 10th because I already had my 4 running backs, and all those teams just completely busted. Graham, I know you were with me last year on 4RB. Are you doing that this year?
Oh man, what a bloodbath that was. That was such a bloodbath. So I was scared to check my MFL 10s at the end of the season because I knew it was so awful. Thank God for Brandon Marshall and Larry Fitzgerald in like the 4th and 5th round last year. That kind of saved me a little bit. Yeah, so I actually pulled some data. RotoViz did an article like in February. This guy named RotoViz, who goes by RotoViz Chaz on Twitter. I'm not sure if he's still on Twitter anymore. But he did the win rates of just various strategies in MFL 10s last year. Get this, so 22% of teams that went 0 running back, 4 wide receivers, and 1 tight end in the first 5 rounds had a 22% win rate. And number 2 was 0 running backs and 5 wide receivers. So Scott,
man.
we lost last year, big time.
Yeah. Could have been so much better.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I missed on Devonta Freeman. I think we've talked about this too on Twitter, man. It's like that was such an outlier kind of thing where he just had those like 5 weeks where he just exploded and just nuked everybody. And he had a solid floor the rest of the year for sure too. But yeah, like you said, I mean, feeling like you already got your 4 or 5 running backs in the first 6, 7 rounds, just kind of puts you by hook or by crook out on the guys like Freeman. It's just so hard to predict, I think, when stuff like that happens, of course. But I definitely should have gone more balanced last year. Like, I had 0 DeAndre Hopkins in the 3rd. Like, that killed me. I loved Antonio Brown, but there was just never a spot where I got him. I had him on 1 team, I think. So going more balanced, I think, is easily the best approach. But, yeah, going that robust RB4, that was pretty brutal.
Yeah. I don't know if people realize it, but like legitimately, like every site, RotoViz, Draft Sharks, everyone was just saying it's a broken game. All you do is just load up on 4 running backs and then don't touch the position again. And then yeah, what Graham said was right. We saw all these teams with like late round running back, 6 running backs total, just completely destroy the sharps that went 4 running back. this year I'm doing the same thing. I'm definitely kind of treating it like a stock portfolio, diversifying. I might have a few where I went 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds, but definitely mixing things up. What are you doing, Johnny?
Yeah, I think a point to last year. I mean, it had gotten so crazy, the RB by 4, that people were just kind of projecting guys. Oh, C.J. Spiller is going to catch 200 passes. Let's take him in the second round. And you're just kind of inventing these narratives to put or to make sense of taking these running backs way earlier than you would in a redraft league or anything like that. So that was definitely part of the problem. I'm diversifying as well. I'm still taking probably running backs a little earlier than a lot of people. I'm still trying to have 2 or 3 kind of stud running backs by the 5th round, just to at least make sure I have some kind of anchor, because I think the market is overcorrecting a little bit. As much as it was people were taking running backs too early, you also have to remember that it was a big year for running back injuries, which we probably won't see repeat this year. So I think the market is going to overcorrect on that particular issue.
That's a good idea, yeah, that maybe running backs are a little devalued right now after how bad they were last year.
Yeah,
or
so
injured.
Sorry, but I just actually did a study on RotoWorld a couple weeks ago about this exact thing and how just weird last year was. So last year, among the top 36 scoring running backs in PPR points per game, there were 105 missed games among those top 36 scorers. Just to kind of put that in perspective, the sample average for the 6 years that I used was 79 missed games. So we saw about 30 more missed games among the top 36 scorers. Yeah, John, I will probably quit fantasy football if that repeats again, because it's not going to happen. I mean, it was just so fluky. And you know what the funny thing is about the data that I used? It didn't include Jamal Charles and Arian Foster, because they missed the cutoff, the 6-game cutoff, by 2 combined games. So that average actually would have gone, excuse me, not the average, the score for last year would have gone up by roughly 23 games. So last year was a fluke. I think you're right that the market is overcorrecting. If anything we know about investing or DFS, anything about fantasy, 1 year kind of move away from what we've been doing is probably a minus EV move. Like just changing your strategy drastically just because 1 year you have a ton of variance is a horrible long-term strategy. When I start doing MFL10s, which will probably be pretty soon here once I start cooking, I'm going to go more balanced. I'm definitely going to learn from last year, but I'm not going to be afraid to take running backs early because there's proven data out there that the top 4 or 5 rounds they're not going to all die. They're going to be okay. But there's going to be a couple that will be top 5 scorers again. I promise. I'm not going to be afraid of it, just like you are, John.
All right, awesome. I think we touched everything on my notes that I wanted to talk about. Now I really want to just get into like the guys you really like, guys you really don't. Want to pick your brain, see who I need to move up or down in my rankings. I want to talk about Jeremy Langford. I don't know if you read Mike Clay's article for PFF. I think it was like the last article he ever did for PFF before moving to ESPN. But it was amazing. It was like Nas's Ether. He just completely destroyed Langford and all of his truthers. His ADP's dropped like a couple rounds since then. What do you guys think about Jeremy Langford? Or even, what do you guys think about like all of the guys who kind of like aren't very good, or at least he struggled last year, but should be due for some immense opportunities? I know, John, you did a lot of game tape watching on guys like Langford and Matt Jones. What do you think?
I just want to quote a tweet I had when I was watching Langford back in February that I just found. I said, Jeremy Langford's turbo button is broken, yo. The thing about Langford is like people think he's this like really fast, explosive runner, and really he's not. He mostly was kind of like a get 3 or 4 yards and fall down kind of back. He didn't have very many moves down the field. He just really was not, what people think that he was. If you had to say a back was that, it was probably Buck Allen was actually probably more so the back that people thought Jeremy Langford was. He was not a very good receiver. He dropped a ton of easy passes. He kind of looked like the game was just a little too much for him. So obviously he could improve. He was a college prospect that a lot of people liked. But he really, really struggled last year, and if he keeps that up, it's going to be really hard for him, especially with a tough coach like John Fox to stay on the field.
Yeah, sure. So, I've been thinking about this. I'm going to eventually do NFL running backs, and by eventually I mean probably in the next couple weeks. And Langford and Devontae Freeman and these types of guys are going to be probably 1 and 2 on my list of guys I want to look at. I honestly the thing with Langford now is, and I did read the Mike Clay article, by the way, Scott, and did you see that in his Twitter bio now he says, I think it's it's not personal, Jeremy Langford or something like that. It's just hilarious. He's hammered him so hard. I think it's honestly gotten to a point with Langford, again, it's May and there's not really much concrete stuff, at least for me. But he's gotten to the point, he's the RB25 now. Obviously, it's not super expensive, but it's also not super cheap. I really don't have a firm take on him. I cannot wait to get to his yards created stuff and really see what the data says. I'd imagine, the things that I've seen, just putting no data, putting nothing down on paper or Excel, wherever it is, the things that I've just watched from a cursory glance, just like John said, I don't necessarily think he's super explosive, even though he does have a pretty high weight-adjusted speed. I think it's 87th percentile off the top of my head. So he is pretty explosive in terms of speed and adjusting for weight, just from an athleticism standpoint, but he's not super agile. He doesn't have a great explosive broad jump or anything like that. But I can't wait to get into the data and kind of hammer on some of the things we all hear on Twitter every day about Langford.
Yeah, just to kind of touch upon how bad it is. So the thing he's supposed to be really good at is as a receiving back, yet he recorded the worst drop rate percentage PFF has ever had among all running backs with at least 30 targets, dating back to 2007 when Brandon Jacobs was only a little bit worse. He also had the lowest forced missed tackle rate, the lowest 15-plus yard rate, and was bottom 3 in pass protection. He was just really, really bad last year. But I see a lot of analysts talking him up. Just it was bad this year, but Devonta Freeman was bad his rookie year, so maybe he's the next Devonta Freeman. I don't know. Devonta Freeman was also top 10 in yards per route run, and you knew Tevin Coleman wasn't going to be getting targets. Okay, so Langford was bad, but also 9 times out of 10 bad players stay bad. And why are we getting excited about a Gaseless John Fox offense when throughout history John Fox's running backs have always been an RBBC nightmare for fantasy owners outside of best ball leagues? Langford, I'm fading him. I've heard some people say he's still a value at RB25. Not at all. Not until he's behind Jonathan Stewart, who's RB28, or Frank Gore, who's RB30. I'm fading him, and I'm buying both of his backups at ADP. What about Matt Jones? What do you guys think about Matt Jones? By the way, not the Matt Jones of my Twitter Avi, the one who's not beautiful and amazing at football.
The legendary Matt Jones.
And an athletic.
The legendary.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, the thing is, I have Matt Jones and Jeremy Langford kind of pinned to one another. It's just, again, they didn't do one thing exceptionally well, and I think there's kind of maybe some noise that's creeped into the conversation about both of those guys. Jones is kind of stuck, though. He's the RB19 ahead of DeMarco Murray, Danny Woodhead, and Ryan Matthews, who I'm sure we'll talk about, by the way, because I love Ryan Matthews. I will make a point to talk about Ryan Matthews. In fact, I'm bringing him up right now. But no, to get back to Matt Jones, Yeah, it's just the same thing with Langford. Like, okay, is he going to catch balls? That's the key thing that I'm looking at in the future and this year is these guys that get targets. Keith Marshall's there now, so he's got a little bit of competition, but I kind of think of it as like they had to. They had nobody else behind. They had nobody else behind Matt Jones. So I'm not too scared off of Keith Marshall's presence. He's going to have the opportunity, but we don't know how talented he is, and I really hope that the yards created that I'm going to be doing on Matt Jones and these guys like Jeremy Langford will eventually maybe we get a 5% better understanding of their game. So that's kind of where I'm at with both of them. I don't hate their price, but I also don't love it by any means. And if I were doing a draft right now, I would probably be in that range where I'm trying to hammer out wide receivers too.
Yeah. And I feel like everyone from RotoViz is going to unfollow me when they hear me say this, but Matt Jones, when I watched Jones and Langford all of their carries. Jones just ran harder than Jeremy Langford. He kind of had, it seemed like he had much more of a goal with where he was going with the ball, and he really did not shy away from contact. The one problem with that, though, is it's going to make him injury prone the way that he runs. And the other thing is I think Chris Thompson is a concern for him in the receiving game because Chris Thompson he's a guy who I've started taking again in the 19th and 20th of MFLs because everyone has completely forgotten about him. And when they were down in the game, everyone came out and Chris Thompson came on the field, and people have kind of replaced Chris Thompson with Keith Marshall when Keith Marshall was like a 7th round pick. So I don't think he's got really enough draft capital to say that he's going to replace Chris Thompson this year as the passing back there. But I was buying Jones when he was like a 7th round pick, but now that he's moving up with all the chatter that he's the guy, I think I'm probably out on him.
Yeah, there's a lot of chatter that he's the guy. Scott McLuhan is saying he's their Marshawn Lynch, which I think is kind of crazy. For fantasy, Matt Jones was terrible. He played in 13 games. He had 2 RB1 games, 0 RB2 games. The rest of the time, he was fantasy irrelevant. I do think Chris Thompson's going to be eating away at targets. He had that one big game against the Giants, but then also in the playoffs, he had a big role. I think it's more likely that the Redskins just go super pass heavy with the addition of their new first-round pick, Josh Doxson. They have Jordan Reed, Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson, and just the entire offense is Kirk Cousins, than it is that Matt Jones is going to be their Marshawn Lynch. But at the same time, even if he is bad, he was bad for fantasy last year, the opportunity is there. Maybe it's not that attractive at his current climbing ADP, but the opportunity is there. What do you do when you have a running back who might not be good, but a ton of opportunity? Are you – because, Johnny, and people know who've watched DFS pods that we're all about opportunity over talent in DFS. But what do you do in MFL10s and with running backs? Or what do you do, Graham? What do you think? How important is your yards created metrics on this? Or at a certain point, are you just saying, I'm projecting 180 touches. That's good at his ADP.
Yeah, I think it depends on price. It's for MFL10s, it's completely price sensitive, and for DFS too, it's completely price sensitive. So the thing about Matt Jones, just kind of wrapping back to him real quick, just kind of put a bow on it, but he had 3 games where he averaged more than 4 yards per carry, and I'm not a big fan of using yards per carry at all. I think it's a highly variable stat over a season or even over a career. But I think on a week-to-week basis, it's an okay proxy. He was not that great last year, for no doubt. But if we can pin him for 180 to 220 touches at the RB19, that's okay. But like you said, I think there's reason to believe that Chris Thompson will have a role. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Chris Thompson's obviously a very good pass catcher when he's on the field. And I definitely agree with what you said, Scott. Washington is going to throw the hell out of the ball. Kirk Cousins quietly has probably the best receiving core in the NFL. Jordan Reed, when he's right, is dominant, Gronk-like. Doxson was my favorite wide receiver in the class this year. Just fantastic at the catch point and after the catch. Djax is a field stretcher. They've even got Jamison Crowder, who's okay in the slot. Like Pierre Garçon is kind of just a guy, but he's been solid throughout his career. So maybe the way this year is just to kind of get our Washington exposure through Kirk Cousins somehow.
You know, another guy who I feel like should fit into this debate is Latavius Murray. He was so insanely disappointing, and people don't realize it, even though he finished as the RB10 in PPR leagues. But he had like a really Fortean workload from the work I was doing with bell cow games. He had a ton of bell cow games. He ranked first for the season in terms of percentage of running back snaps, first in percentage of running back carries, and second in percentage of running back targets. No, they also drafted Washington. Del Rio, too, has historically always used a bell cow. Let me pull it up. I want to say something like So the lead running back for Del Rio over his last 5 seasons has averaged 77.4% of the team running back attempts, 74% of the team running back snaps, and 69% of the running back targets. What do we think about Latavius Murray? Are we worried about Washington, or is Washington the guy? He's another guy who kind of struggled last year but should have opportunity.
The thing with Murray is like he was, like you said, he wasn't great. Like if you look at his numbers, his straight across numbers, he's the RB10 like you said. But he only had 9 RB2 weeks, which, I mean, like that's okay for a floor, but the receiving prowess just wasn't there, maybe like what we expected. And DeAndre Washington, I can't wait to write him up. I actually have an upcoming article about DeAndre Washington and his chops in the pass game. The Del Rio thing is super interesting, and I guess I really didn't realize that he featured a bell cow like that, so I can't wait to read your article about it. But I really like Washington just as like kind of as a cheap hedge to catch some balls out of the backfield there. The thing with Murray is it's interesting because he was a good floor option last year, and he is, I believe, the RB18 in ADP. So it's not horrible. I feel like I keep saying this. It's not a horrible price. It's not like he's egregiously mispriced to the point where like I just am completely out on him. Like I am completely out on Carlos Hyde. But I mean, it's not a horrible price, and it's not a horrible spot. And DeAndre Washington is kind of he's a little bit smaller, and obviously he went like a 6th or 7th round pick, I believe, off the top of my head. He wasn't super highly drafted. So I don't know how I feel about Murray either.
Yeah, he was. I guess we just lost Scott. Murray was one of 12 backs to have 600 or more offensive snaps for, I think it was 12. Yeah. 600 or more snaps for their team. So that's a valuable role if we can find the guy who's going to be there. Problem is I don't think that we're going to really know who that's going to be anytime soon. So I'm probably okay with Murray at ADP, but I'm not really stoked about him. I think I only have a couple shares. And I think that team though is going to be super valuable to get that guy because that offensive line is probably going to be a top 5 unit this year. So I would love to maybe hope that Murray is going to keep getting the same role, but I think it's a little scary when you're having to take him in like the 4th round of MFLs.
Meanwhile, DeAndre Washington is RB62 in MFL10s, going behind Wendell Smallwood and Darren McFadden.
And Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake.
Yeah. Graham. Yeah, I know you're not high on Kenyon Drake. He didn't do well, right, in your yards per created?
Yeah, see, the thing is he actually destroyed it. Like, he was very good, but my problem with Drake is like it was only 39 carries, and, Alabama basically just schemed the ball to him. He wasn't, like, very – I didn't – just from a personal kind of viewing of him, I guess this is completely subjective and not in the yards created data, but they obviously just schemed the ball to him. Like, it wasn't something like Derrick Henry where they just gave him the ball up the middle. But the thing with Dwayne Washington that I really, really like is I think he's probably sneakishly like a top 3 pass catcher in this class, just in terms of his chops in the passing game. Let me pull up some quick data here on his routes. He actually ran the most routes in this class in his 5 games. He ran 78 pass routes, which is just a ton. That's 16 if we're rounding per game. He got targeted on roughly 35% of his snaps, and they moved him around too. He went out wide about 10% of the time. I really like Washington at his ADP, but the problem for MFL10s is he basically has 0 floor. If he does catch passes, he'll have it, but right now I don't think there's a discernible floor for him because we just don't know the role he's going to have. And it's not like he was a super early pick, like I mentioned.
All right, I'm not going to let you get away from something. A couple of minutes ago, you said you're really down on Carlos Hyde.
Yeah.
Even though Chip Kelly is coming to town, let's hear it.
Yeah. So my thing with Hyde is like, I pulled up some of his kind of like the advanced splits on Pro Football Reference, and so kind of pigeonholing what Hyde has done in his career. He's actually he's averaged 5.3 yards per attempt in the shotgun, and only 3.1 yards under center. I think there's some noise to that, and I don't feel great about using that just as like a true indicator. But he has been better typically in the shotgun. My thing with Hyde is he's not a great pass catcher. And at RB13, for a guy that has only caught 2 or more balls in 28.6% of his games, I'm not really thrilled about taking him at RB13. And I think the floor is lower because he doesn't have a great passing game pedigree. And I think, Scott, you actually have a really cool stat about his pass game chops at Ohio State. Is that right?
Yeah, he had 34 receptions in 41 games at Ohio State University. Hyde's a guy I really struggle with because I think Chip Kelly coming to town is awesome. The team wasn't even that good last year. They still had over 400 rushing attempts and 15 rushing touchdowns. In fact, like all 3 seasons in Chip Kelly's NFL career, he's had at least 400 attempts and 14 rushing touchdowns. And Hyde himself is really, really good as like a player. Last year, he ranked top 10 in yards after the catch per attempt. He ranked number 1 in missed tackles per rush. I think he's super talented as a pure runner. Is he going to catch passes? No, I don't think so. How's that offensive line? Do we even know if Anthony Davis is officially unretired yet? Probably not. Is the team going to be good? Probably not. So I don't know. It's a balance of like he should get rushing volume with Chip Kelly. I think he's talented, but he's just not in a good spot. And his ADP right now is pretty high. He's going above C.J. Anderson, who I like more. What are you doing, John?
I was all over Hyde until his ADP started to move. I mean, for a while you could get him in the 4th round, and I was kind of like auto picking him in the 4th. As you said, Scott, with your article that's coming out, snaps are kind of like the most important thing for a running back, and we know there's only one offensive coach that's going to run the most snaps in the NFL by a wide margin. It's going to be Chip Kelly. So I think he's going to be on the field. I don't think he has a whole lot of competition. And a lot of people like to look at last year and say, he wasn't very good over the course of the season, but I mean, he hurt his foot halfway through the game against Pittsburgh in week 2, so he was hurt the whole season, and he still registered really high on PFFs, forced missed tackles. So I think if a guy who's hurt for 7 games can lead the league in forced missed tackles, then imagine what he's going to do healthy when you're giving him tons and tons of snaps. That being said, I think his ADP, he kind of sort of goes back and forth between like RB12 and RB13 sort of area. I think that's probably too high. I'm probably not taking him over C.J. Anderson, but I am taking him when he falls into the 4th round. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, sure. I'm fine. I'm fine with him there too in the 4th round. But the thing is, like you said, it's just we all have to adjust this for cost. And the thing that I'm kind of thinking about, just from just looking at that offense on paper and kind of just doing my like back of the napkin projections before I have like any solid takes this summer, that team is. I have a very hard time seeing that team being competitive this year. We know that Chip Kelly's going to juice them up with snaps. We know that he likes to run. He'll want to run. But how much does that matter when you're getting pounded and you're down by 10 at halftime? You're not going to come out and try to run the ball. He's going to be juiced up with snaps. But I think just adjusting for game flow, I'm kind of out. You're going to have to convince me that the 49ers are going to be even closely resembling competitive this year.
Yeah, negative game script is not good for a running back who does not catch passes. I want to talk about like maybe 2 or 3 running backs who are among your most owned running backs in MFL10s. Graham, I know you haven't done too many, so who are a few running backs you're way higher on than most? I know you already touched on a guy who's in my top 3 most owned running backs, and that's Ryan Matthews. I know you're high on him, so give me the case for Ryan Matthews.
Yeah, so I don't want to steal at 14 Team Mocker's thunder. He went on like a soliloquy on RotoViz Radio about Ryan Matthews, but I'm on Matthews, big time this year. I honestly will probably. I don't know how hot I'm going to get with the take, but he's going to be easily in my top 15, and I might push him into the top 12. Super athletic. We kind of forget he was a top 12 pick in the NFL draft, and that's something I put a lot of weight in his draft capital. Ryan Matthews was a top 12 pick. He was ultra productive in college. But the thing is Ryan Matthews is a sneaky, great receiver. He's caught 2 or more balls in 64% of his games, his career games. And like to put that in comparison, I threw this out with Hyde, but Carlos Hyde has caught 2 or more balls in 29% of his games, and Latavius Murray, who's the RB18, has caught 2 or more balls in 48% of his games. And Ryan Matthews is going well after both of them in ADP right now. My concern, I guess, is Ryan Matthews, the hype train might start kicking in, but you're kind of getting him at a risk-adjusted cost because everybody thinks he's injury-prone, which is for another show, but I think the injury-prone label is a bit ridiculous and overblown.
Well, you're not concerned with Wendell Smallwood, who Twitter says is going to replace him by preseason week 2?
Yeah, so people are going to be real pissed when Ryan Matthews doesn't get hurt and he's the top 12 running back this year. I like Smallwood, actually. I think he's a really good receiver. They moved him around a lot in West Virginia. He actually profiled as a really good runner per yards created. Actually, I think he was 3rd in the class, I believe, in yards created per attempt. Yeah, he's 3rd in the class. So he's a good runner. I actually really like Wendell Smallwood, but the thing is like, I just think Ryan Matthews at this point in his career is just significantly better. And Ryan Matthews was fantastic last year. He had like 47%, I believe, of his carries went for 5 or more yards, which is 15% more than DeMarco Murray in the same climate with the same offensive line. I'm big on Ryan Matthews this year.
Yeah, and Smallwood was a 5th-round pick, so I don't think it wasn't like the Eagles were going out to replace Ryan Matthews. They kind of just scooped up a little bit of insurance with him being injury-prone. And with Sproles, like, not being at OTAs and those issues, the more time Sproles misses, the more receptions he loses to Ryan Matthews in the season, probably.
Yeah, Ryan Matthews ranked 1st in fantasy points per snap, 1st in fantasy points per opportunity last season. Doug Peterson is coming from Chip Kelly's Kansas City offense, where they ranked 3rd most in bell cow games over the past 3 seasons. I like Wendell Smallwood, but I see him more as a receiver than as a runner. You just said he was good as a runner, but just from what I've seen, he was better as a receiver. And he just kind of like profiles more as like the Sproles type than as like a pure workhorse running back. And I just think Ryan Matthews is just going to explode this season. I think that Eagles offense is going to run the ball a ton. I think he's a huge value. And the weirdest thing about him was I was loading up on him pre-draft. I didn't think the Eagles were going to take Zeke. And then his ADP, it didn't even just stay the same. It dropped after the Eagles took Wendell Smallwood super, super late. It made no sense. Yeah, I have a ton of Ryan Matthews, and I feel great about it. Is there anyone else you really like, Graham?
Yeah, just to kind of put a bow on the Matthews thing, like you said about how his ADP dropped after they got Wendell Smallwood. It's like, okay, what were they going to do? Darren Sproles has never been a great rusher. He's always been a pass catching back, and they got Kenyon Barner, who's never done anything. And it's the same thing as the Washington grabbing Keith Marshall. They had to. And like you said, I really like how Peterson comes from the Andy Reid kind of type of offense where they're going to hammer the ball and they feed their number one guy. To be honest, right now in ADP, there's really not anybody else I love outside of the top 25. I think a lot of things are going to shift. But just kind of I honestly, and I know this sounds crazy and I might get ridiculed for this, but I have nothing to back this up. But I kind of don't hate Melvin Gordon at RB31. Am I ridiculous for that?
Yeah, no, I'll take this one. Melvin Gordon was one of my most owned running backs in the early season of MFLs when he was just going in the 6th round, and I was just kind of pre-drafting him all the time just as my 5th and 6th round picks. It concerned me that he had microfracture surgery, because the outlook on that has not been that great with a lot of people who've had it. But it seems that the medicine may have come a little farther with that type of surgery. I mean, Travis Kelce had it, and he seems to be fine. And they say that he's currently practicing without restrictions, and there's no issues. So I think he's probably going to move his way back into a guy that I'm going to start taking a lot of again. One thing with Melvin Gordon that people don't really talk about and they kind of ignore is that last year Danny Woodhead, they were essentially phasing him out of the offense. If you watched what they were doing in the middle of the season, they didn't put him on the field until they would be down, 14 points or something, and then they would take Gordon off the field and they would start running that hurry-up spread offense that they were running that they didn't put Gordon in. But when they were running that spread offense, they were splitting Gordon out wide, and they were having him do all of the Danny Woodhead stuff that Danny was doing the first couple weeks, and they were throwing him the ball, and they seemed very set on making him the guy there. And if that defense has improved at all, and they are staying more competitive, then Danny Woodhead is not going to do what he did last year, and that just opens up Melvin Gordon for more opportunity to play more snaps. And even if he's not a great rusher, even if he averages, 3.5 to 4 yards a carry or something, you look at Devontae Freeman, you can still have an insanely valuable role if you're just on the field all the time. And I think that's something that he is going to be doing a lot more of this year.
Yeah, I'd love to play that clip just over and over again all off season, John, about Melvin Gordon, because that's pretty much exactly how I feel about him. And at RB31, you're getting that risk-adjusted cost for microfracture. And I wanted to actually just touch on this real quick about the microfracture surgery. So Football Outsiders did a study in 2007 about microfractures. And they basically said, long story short, the earlier you get the surgery done in your career, the higher percentage chance you have it coming back. And Gordon's obviously, this is his second year in the NFL. Travis Kelce had it early. So the later you have it in your career, could spell major problems, but I'm not, especially since he's practicing right now, I'm not too concerned about it. And I know that sounds crazy, but I'm really not that concerned.
Yeah, I'm becoming less and less concerned.
Yeah, just another thing about Melvin Gordon is he had 184 rushing attempts and 33 receptions and 0 touchdowns. I feel like he's due for at least some positive regression.
He should have had 1.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, one's not too much, but yeah, maybe even more than that.
I know, John. I know the exact play you're talking about because I think I had him in DFS for 2 or 3 straight weeks because there was so much every single sign had him pointed for regression, just having a massive explosion game. That offensive line was so bad, and I hope to God they improved it. I think they did, but the offensive line was so bad. it kept Maddenly giving the ball to Danny Woodhead in the red zone, who actually I think is still somehow a hashtag gritty underrated player for what he does. But yeah, I was banking on that Gordon regression so hard last year and it just never came.
Yeah, I think I had 100% of him the week that he scored that touchdown because his price kept going down, and then that was finally the sweet spot.
Yeah, I did too. I remember that game.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
go ahead, Scott.
The Chargers had far and away the worst run blocking unit according to PFF last year. So yeah, he didn't have much help from his offensive line.
And the thing is they didn't even have to improve the offensive line. They just have to stay upright. I mean, they had the most offensive line injuries of any team by far. And most of the guys who were playing in the later half of the season weren't even healthy. They just had to be out there because they didn't have anyone left.
Yeah, they kept cycling through tackle after tackle. I mean, they just were throwing warm bodies out there that just could not, like you said, they couldn't stand up. It was so frustrating to watch that offense crumble, especially without Keenan Allen too. That was going to be a fun offense, I think, last year. But Allen's injury, then they had all those injuries on the offensive line. I think your
defense was bad. No game script.
Yeah, the defense was horrible last year. You're kind of getting all of that. You're kind of getting the same exact situation in Melvin Gordon that we had last year, and Gordon was the RB16, RB18, and ADP last year. You're getting that at half the price now. Well, I mean, The only thing that's really changed is the microfracture, and if all the reports are true that it is okay that he's having it early, he's out there early with no restrictions and OTAs, and it's early June. I'm kind of on board with that, but it's something I'm definitely gonna be monitoring all off season.
Yep, and when he scores his first touchdown in the preseason, that's it.
Yeah. I'm in. Once he just got to sniff the end zone, man.
Johnny, who were some of your most owned running backs?
So
in MFL10s?
My most owned running back by far right now is Shane Vereen. He just seems to I'm looking in the 13th round or so for my RB5, and he just seems to always be there. So I just take him. The thing is that he was kind of like an up-and-down guy. He's not a guy you want to own in redraft, probably, because he's really hard to predict on a week-to-week basis. But in best ball, you can just pick him and then let it go, and he's going to have some big weeks. Andre Williams is terrible. Rashad Jennings is a guy who I also am kind of high on. So I think if you can get Jennings and Vereen in round 10 and round 13, and then you kind of just have the Giants running back, unless, this guy that everybody seems to like on Twitter is going to somehow supplant them this season, which I don't really see happening.
Yeah, I like Paul Perkins. PFF actually had him as their most elusive running back. But yeah, I don't think he's going to contribute too much this year. I think it's going to be something like Jennings and Vereen. I like Jennings significantly more than Vereen, though, just on the off chance that he just gets way more touches. He was surprisingly pretty good. He just was underused. Last year, he had only one more carry and just 9 fewer rushing yards than Lamar Miller. He was fantasy's number 5 running back over the final 4 games, where he posted a 5.1 rushing yards per carry. And 460 rushing yards. So Jennings is the guy I like there. And TJ Calkins, definitely follow him on Twitter if you can, but he's been on the show before. He brought up that he thought that the last 4 to 5 games was when really Coughlin kind of took a back seat and just let his young offensive coordinator, McAdoo, kind of control the reins because he knew he was on his way out. And that's why Jennings really took on a much bigger role and the running game was more involved. I don't know if that's true, but I do think Jennings has significantly more potential than Vereen.
If that's true, though, Vereen had 25 targets over those last 4 weeks. So he was a guy who was catching the ball. And they also don't really have maybe Will Tye is a reliable tight end option. I don't know. They don't really have a great tight end option, and they really don't have a great receiving core outside of Beckham.
I like Shepard.
I like Shepard a lot too, but that's it. So I think you're going to see a lot more of Vereen this year.
Yeah, so what happens when Andre Williams gets 100 carries a game and runs into the back of offensive linemen and falls over and then does nothing all year and gets like 1 yard per carry? What happens? What happens? What happens then? No, I'm joking, of course. Yeah, he's. I had a comment on my DLF rankings. We're allowed to comment on our ranks over there, and before I took some of my comments down after the draft, my comment on Andre Williams, I ranked him just maddeningly, just as a hate rank, as the RB 100, and my comment was, he's literally the worst running back ever to step foot on the NFL field. But no, I'm joking aside here. Like, this is just such a freaking mess. This is such a mess. Like, we've got the Jennings angle, who's the veteran who finished up the season with actually 2 top 12 PPR weeks. He finishes the RB8 and the RB1 in 2 of the last 3 weeks. But before then was basically just a borderline floor RB3. Shane Vereen's got the pass game chops. He's always had those, especially in New England. Then now we've got Paul Perkins, and I'm sort of pretty much meh. I've described myself as meh on Paul Perkins. If you didn't like Devontae Freeman, I think this is a really good comp, but it's not a perfect comp, of course. But if you didn't like Devontae Freeman coming out of Florida State, you probably aren't going to like Paul Perkins, because they're kind of the type of player that doesn't really do one thing extremely well. They do a little bit of everything okay. But at least they're all cheap. You just kind of have to pick one and roll with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, is there anyone else you're super high on, Johnny?
No, I guess I'm starting to take a lot more of DeMarco Murray. People, I mean, the hate is I think going a little too far. I'm starting to see him fall into the 6th round in drafts, and whenever that happens, I'm automatically just clicking him.
Who is this?
DeMarco Murray. I don't think they brought him over and picked up that contract to just suddenly, use him for half the season and then put Derrick Henry on the field. And if you followed Scott on Twitter for a while, Derrick Henry he's not really a receiver, and that was the thing that DeMarco. People like to say that DeMarco Murray completely lost it last year, but as a receiver, he looked exactly the same as he did in Dallas. He's a great receiver. So I think that's going to keep him on the field over Derrick Henry, even if he's struggling as a runner. And those PPR points are just so valuable, especially when you have a running quarterback.
Yeah, so I guess... Go ahead, Scott. My bad.
No, I just agree that when he falls there, I have no problem taking him. Derrick Henry is a poor man's Brandon Jacobs. Not a fan. I think. See, I have a big thing for plotters. Like, I have a plotter fetish. We've talked about it at length on this podcast. I make my girlfriend dress up in Trent Richardson jerseys and literally run in the mud. It's the only way I can get off. Yeah, I think Derrick Henry is a guy I'm going to love in like a year or two, but I think he's going to do nothing for us over the next 2 seasons. And then his ADP will plummet, and then I'll love him. But I'm a hater for the next 2 seasons. I'm locked into that. Graham, what do you think about DeMarco Murray?
All right, so I had to mute my microphone because I was laughing. Your plotter fetish. So if you love plotters, Antonio Andrews is still on the roster. You should love Antonio Andrews if you like a Titans running back. Man.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
He's like the perfect plotter. If you throw away into Andre Williams, Antonio Andrews is by far the worst plotter in the NFL.
I like productive plotters, though. You have to be productive.
Okay, that's a fair point. Antonio Andrews is hashtag bad. But yeah, so the thing with Henry is I think that's an interesting take. I don't think he actually comps anything close to Brandon Jacobs, because Brandon Jacobs was a freak, like in terms of weight-adjusted speed, weight, and height. I don't think Henry is anything really close to Jacobs, because Jacobs was actually the unicorn that we all think Henry is.
Exactly. Yes.
That's not okay. Now I'm going to take this the other way, though, Scott. Is like that's not taking anything away from Henry. I think he's a damn good pure runner, The problem, though, is he's not going to catch the ball. At Alabama, they really did not ask him to do anything to catching the ball. We all saw it. We don't really need to talk too much about it. But to kind of put that into data terms, I chart what's called check and release pass routes, where basically the running back is just asked, hey, if there's a blitzing linebacker coming off the end, if the defensive end the left tackle splits his assignment, and the defensive end leaks out, you got to go check that guy. So I chart what's called a check and release, where the running back will check, he'll stay near behind the offensive line, then he'll go out into the flat. And Derrick Henry did that 41% of his routes, which was by far the most in the class. The class average was 23%, and it was 15% more than the next closest running back. They just didn't ask him to do anything in the passing game, and it was frustrating because I think he might be okay because he's so powerful and so explosive, but he's not natural. It looks awkward back there. And DeMarco Murray is obviously fantastic pass catcher. I think what you said about how people have, myself included, DeMarco Murray was my RB1 last year, just to put that in perspective. So I loved DeMarco Murray last year. I actually love DeMarco Murray, which is weird now hearing myself say it. I like DeMarco Murray for pretty much all the reasons people like Carlos Hyde this year, which is interesting. But no, to that point, DeMarco Murray was super productive for all those years in Dallas, and the offensive line was great. But it's frustrating because the Titans have spent so much on their running backs. Like, they just spent a second-round pick on Henry. They picked up Murray's contract. They just, 2 years ago, spent a second-round pick on Bishop Sankey. So I don't have a clear idea of what the hell they want to do with the ball. But we do know Mike Mularkey wants to go exotic smash mouth, whatever the hell that means. I'm not sure how that relates to either Murray or Henry. But it is something that I'm interested in if we know what the clear roles will be, but I don't think we know. Do you guys have a great feel for that?
I think it seems like they're doing a lot of sort of building because Mariota is really young. So it seems like I just don't see Henry as like a NFL ready kind of guy. I think he's such a raw, only did one thing at college type guy that it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't have a very big role this year. And I think to have a guy like DeMarco Murray in front of him was kind of seemed like what they were doing. Bring a vet in who's done it all and let him learn under him for a year. And I think they probably just had Henry high on their draft board and were like, well, he's here, let's take him. But, I don't know for sure. You never know. But just to go down Narrative Street.
Yeah, Narrative Street is always a fun way to go. I always love Narrative Street. I miss Narrative Street.
He'll be back soon.
I can't wait.
So I'm just going to jump in and talk about my most owned running backs. I think my sixth most owned running back is Ingram, but I feel like he should be higher just how much I love him. He only played 12 games last year, but he had the second most running back RB1 weeks. He had 8, and he had the third most RB1 plus RB2 weeks. He had 11. He ranked top 10 in yards after contact per attempt and top 10 in missed tackles per reception. The Saints don't need Spiller to maybe finally get healthy. Ingram's going to be their workhorse, and it's going to be beautiful. It's an elite offense. He's currently being drafted after Fat Boy Eddie Lacy. I'm all in on him this year. What do you guys think about Ingram?
I don't have a whole lot of Ingram yet, but I do like where he's going. I'm happy to get him in the third round whenever he falls, and I think he's a great pick at the end of the second too.
Yeah, to that point, Ingram had I don't know how often this is discussed, because I think we all thought C.J. Spiller, myself included, we all thought Spiller would kind of be that pass game Darren Sproles type last year. But that ended up actually being Ingram. Ingram had 3 or more targets in every game except for 1 last year. And that type of floor and consistency is unparalleled in today's NFL, where we have guys like Danny Woodhead kind of pop up for huge weeks, and then they're the next week the RB36. Just having that type of consistency with Ingram, and you're getting him at kind of a discount, the RB10. that's a great price for him, man. And once I really start hammering out these MFL10s and really have some like solid redraft takes, Scott, I'm going to be right there with you with Ingram because he was so consistent last year and was such a great cash game play for DFS. Like there was 3 or 4 weeks in a row on DraftKings where I was just auto-clicking Mark Ingram because he was so consistent.
Yep.
And honestly, he was great as receiving back in 2014 as well. He had 30 targets and 29 receptions and 0 drops. I really think he's just going to be 100% their bell cow back and just dominate in terms of receptions and targets. Another running back I have a ton of ownership in is LeGarrette Blount, but that was mostly when he was free in like the 18th round. I just think he's a super solid bell cow, super solid underpriced best ball running back. He had 11 games last year. He had highs of 28, 23, 19, 16. I think you're going to see a lot of games where the Patriots get up on their opponents and just kind of hammer him in the red zone. And so like a super solid role for him that he's had for a while. But my most owned running back far and away is Jonathan Stewart. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like I know that you're going to get Tolbert and Cam Newton kind of vulturing touchdowns, but I still don't care. He's RB28, and he's pretty much the last running back on the board, besides Frank Gore, who I also like, who's guaranteed the starter, going to get a ton of, like a super high percentage of the snaps and carries. And I know he doesn't really catch too many passes, but it's still an elite offense. A lot of opportunity for rushing yards and touchdowns and carries. What do you guys think about Jonathan Stewart as the RB28?
Yeah, I'm buying Stewart. He had the 10th most offensive snaps last year, and like you said, snaps are kind of the end all for running backs. And I think I think it was kind of a fluke that he didn't really catch any passes last year because he's been a good pass catcher through his career. Maybe not an elite pass catcher, but he's been a good pass catcher. And I think we'll probably see him end up with a little more passing work this year than last year.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like even if he doesn't, if the same thing kind of rolls over where he's not super involved in the pass game, there was a stretch of 8 games last year where he had 20 or more carries, and that buoys your floor no matter what. It doesn't matter how efficient you are as a runner. Really, honestly, it doesn't really matter how efficient you are or how many touches you get in the red zone. You know, even if Cam Newton, who is a cheat code in the red zone, is vulturing touchdowns. You know, I don't really know if that matters, and there's really not much there's no competition. Like, are we really that concerned about Cameron Artis-Payne, who's old and has never really done anything in his career? I'm not. So I'm on Stewart. I like his ADP. It was basically that you're getting him at the same price for as you were last year. Maybe he's a little bit cheaper. Maybe he's a little bit cheaper last year, but you're kind of getting the same climate, same offense, same idea, but the price hasn't changed much.
Yeah, just to touch back upon what Johnny was saying about snaps is so like over the past 3 seasons, the study I did, I figured out correlation to fantasy points, and the highest correlation is rushing touchdowns, of course, and then rushing yards, but then snaps, and then receiving yards, and then carries, and then receptions, and I just thought that was like so crazy that like snaps ranked so high above things like receptions and receiving yards that give you actual points, or attempts that should like highly correlate to rushing yards. And like this study was done among all running backs with at least a minimum of 25% of their team running back snaps. So like it's already skewing against snaps, and snaps ranked so highly that really you just want to like target running backs who get like a super high percentage of their team snaps, and that's definitely going to be the case here with Jonathan Stewart. There's like minimal competition. Definitely a guy I'm really high on. I know TJ, who I just mentioned before, TJ Calkins, super high on as well. I know we kind of like went over our allotted hour. It's like the power hour, but we're at like a minute 15 now, I want to say. Johnny or Graham, is there anything you want to end on or anything you still want to talk about?
Nah, man, it was a great time being on here with you guys. It was a fun chat, and we're definitely gonna have to do this again. Can't
Yeah.
wait, maybe to talk some DFS. I can't wait for NFL DFS. I've got the itch. I'm
Ugh.
playing MLB DFS, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Just trying to scratch the itch. But no, it was a great time. Thanks for having me on, you guys.
For sure, man. Find Graham on Twitter at Graham Barfield. Find Scott on Twitter at DudeFantasyBro, and you can find me at SuperDuperman22.
Which, by the way, is the worst Twitter handle of all time. Second only to Dude Fantasy Bro. Yeah, this is fucking awesome. Graham, you were great. Learned a ton. Super wicked sharp mind. Everyone follow Graham. Guys, we'll be back on next week, maybe the weekend after. We're going to have Matt Harmon on, who's a giant megalith within the industry. He is everywhere. It's going to be super fun. We're going to talk about wide receivers in MFL10s. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, if you're still listening, and take care. Bye.